Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Battishall, and today I'm going to continue off the back of our series talking about the new low to mid-rise reforms, stage 2, that have come about. And I promised recently that I would talk about terraces. So today I want to spend a little bit of time just walking you through terraces under the new mid to low rise reforms. We've seen an incredible opportunity, as I've mentioned, the last month really, about this new low to mid rise reform that's come out in well located areas. Across New South Wales, we've seen potentially 170,000, well, it's probably closer to 120,000 new development sites open up across New South Wales, especially areas of Sydney, Hunter, Central Coast, Wollongong, Shoalhaven, Kiama. We're seeing some really exciting areas open up, and as a result, there's some really exciting development opportunities. So I want to talk a little bit in this short episode today around terraces, because I know a lot of terraces are a terrific way for residential investors and developers and people like yourself who want to do these kind of projects to create yield on a site that you may not have otherwise been able to create. And I always say the early adopters, when a new code or when a new reform comes out, it's the early adopters who are the ones who will often do the best out of this code and out of this reform. So for me, this is an exciting space. I want to walk you through some of the opportunities and some of the possibilities of doing terraces. And first and foremost, let's just debunk a myth. A lot of people, when they look at terraces, they think of the old Balmain or Paddington style terraces. Terraces for me they're like a townhouse, but they're essentially all attached. And with the difference is with a terrace, often townhouses, you can have various different types of townhouses. You could have townhouses that run one at the front, then run them back, or you could have two at the front, then a row of them with a driveway down the middle. The difference is all of your terraces, to be considered a terrace, they all have to be attached. Obviously, townhouses or multi-dwelling, you can detach. With terraces, they have to be attached and they all have to address the street. When I say address the street, the front doors have to front the street, all of them. So you'll have a row of them. So a little bit like what you'll see in Paddington or Balmain, some of those areas where you've got a lot of terraces. But terraces don't always necessarily, in this modern sense, they don't represent obviously heritage or they don't represent that style. But in terms of what a terrace is, they're all attached. The front doors all address the street. Now, you can either have your garages address the street, or you can find development sites, for example, where you can have a laneway, for example, or it could be a front to back street where you can have then reloaded garages, or on some development sites you can have a driveway that goes down the side with reloaded garages of it, provided you can make that comply. But generally, in a sense, most terraces you'll find in the modern sense, it'll be a garage and the front door all addressing the street. So it could be a series of 3, 4, 5, or if you can amalgamate a couple of blocks, you can sometimes get anywhere from 5 to 6, depending on the size of the block, the size of the site. So essentially terraces under this code means 3, minimum of 3. So obviously dual occupancy is dual, which is 2. So then you go to multi, or multi essentially in a DA sense means 3 or more. In a terrace sense, terraces is 3 or more. So when someone says, I want to do 2 terraces, that's just a dual occupancy, or a duplex is the slang term, the most common term that we'll call it. But in this sense, when you hear triplex, a triplex is essentially, under this reform, a triplex is obviously like a duplex, but 3, that's essentially terraces. So obviously you'll hear some of these different words. In places like Queensland, you'll hear triplex a lot. We don't hear it so much in New South Wales because essentially a triplex is 3 terraces. So yes, you can do terraces under CDC, under the low-rise diversity code, but also under this new low to mid-rise reform, which is what we've been focusing off the back of this new reform that was announced on the 28th of February. We see now that across well-located areas in New South Wales And I'll remind you, if you haven't listened to previous episodes, go back and listen to some of the episodes where we break down this new low to mid-rise reform. But for those who have, this may be your first episode listening, under this new SEP or new state legislation, we see now that there is a whole bunch of mapped areas that the state government in New South Wales have mapped to be considered well-located areas. Now, in our show notes, we'll put the link back up so that you can see that mapped area. So you can put the address of your site into that mapping system, spatial viewer, so you can actually see if the property that you either own or are looking to acquire, whether it falls within that well-located area. If it does fall within that well-located area, it means that then you can allow or you can apply some of the new SEP legislation to this particular project. And today we're talking about terraces. So some of that, if you do fall within that well-located area or within that mapping system, we see now, and again, I'll repeat this for those who may not have listened to previous episodes, this new state legislation sits above council's legislation. So in terms of a hierarchy, this new state legislation for the low to mid-rise code, it actually sits as a hierarchy above council's local environment plan, the LEP, and also above council's development control plan, the DCP. So some of these new controls for terraces are simply this. So you can now do, if you are in that well-located area, you can now do terraces, multi-dwelling, within an R2 zoned area, so a low-density residential area. A lot of council areas across New South Wales have previously not allowed multi-dwelling or terraces to be achieved or done under the past conditions. Under the new SEP legislation, if you fall within that well-located area, you can now do terraces. So it falls within R2 zoning. You need to have a minimum of an 18-metre frontage. The height limit, 9.5 metres, same as multi-dwelling, same as dual occupancy. The floor space ratio is terrific, is 0.7 or 0.7 to 1, or 70% of the site can be used for FSR, floor space ratio, which is a good thing because most R2 zoned areas on average across New South Wales in these well-located areas tend to be about that 50%. So you're getting an additional 20% generally on average uplift. And then you need a minimum 500 square metre block. So again, that's a really good win because a lot of council areas to do multi-dwelling or 3 or more, you've often needed 600, even 900 or even more in some council areas. And then the subdivision size, minimum lot size, resulting lot size for the subdivision is 165 square metres, where each lot created is required to be 6 metres. So there's some controls that essentially will override council's LEP and DCP. So if council has a control currently of 8.5 metre height limit, under this new SEP legislation, you can go 9.5 metres instead of the 8.5 that council have, and this new legislation overrides it. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind if you're doing a DA under this new legislation. So let's just say you want to do a DA for 3 terraces. You find a corner lot that you want to do 3 terraces, and I'll just jump back. Also, car parking. The car parking is an interesting one. It's saying 0.2 car spaces per dwelling, which is very interesting. Most people, you'll obviously want to have a car space for your terrace. That's it. That's the key ideal. But look, I think the big thing now, if you're wanting to do a DA for terraces, you still need to be aware that although you've got these legislations now, these state legislations or these non-discretionary standards that council can't refuse or reject a DA for that criteria based on the SEP, you still need to comply with a lot of council's requirements. And there's actually, for terraces, there's actually a low-rise diversity code. A lot of people don't know this, but you've got a low-rise diversity code design guideline for CDC, but there's also a low-rise diversity housing code design guideline for DA. And a lot of the elements of that design guideline for terraces under DA, there's a lot of things that point back to council's DCP. For example, you still need to comply with solar access. So you've got to make sure you achieve your sun. Most councils, you need roughly 3 hours of continuous sunlight in winter to both your private open space and your living area. You've still got to comply with the right size private open space. Some councils, it could be 30 square metres, 24 square metres, some are even 40, some are a 5 by 4 metre principal private open space. So you still need to meet that requirement as well. Obviously setbacks, you've got front setbacks, rear setbacks, side setbacks. You still need to comply with all of your setbacks requirements by council. So there's a lot of controls that you still need to adhere to council's DCP. And just like I spoke about recently on our multi-dwelling facet or element of the new low to mid-rise code, just because the minimum lot size might be 500 square metres, 18 metre frontage, does not necessarily mean that you're going to fit 3 dwellings on that site, because when you have this project assessed, you're still going to have to comply. You're still going to have to comply with a whole bunch of development controls. So I always encourage people, like, when you're looking, if you haven't bought the site yet, the best thing you can do is invest in getting a good feasibility sketch, because what it does, it gives you certainty of the yield you can fit on the site, but it also gives you confidence of what size dwellings you can get, so you can run accurate numbers, so you can really determine, is there any constraints or issues or problems. And anyone who's listened to this podcast numerous times understands and knows that I always say a lot of people don't factor in contingency, or they don't factor in a little bit of budget for doing their due diligence. I'm amazed the amount of developers that don't want to spend a little bit of money on their due diligence. And I always tell people, like, from your previous job, factor in a bit of contingency for due diligence. And if you don't use it, you just stack it up onto your next project. But if you factor in contingency into your feasibility from day one, a couple of grand of contingency, and often you may not need to use it, but if you need to get arborist report, if you need to get a feasibility sketch from a designer or a planner, if you need to get a planning report to give you the confidence, but also so you can run clearer numbers, more accurate numbers, and you're not getting left with your pants down in that project because you didn't take the time to run your numbers. And I'm amazed the amount of people that are happy to lose multiple, 5 figures, even 6 figures, due to poor planning or just due to poor execution at acquisition stage, that comes back to bite them. And the problem is, it leads to high stress. It leads to, obviously, a loss of profit. It leads to frustration. And often you'll take that frustration then out on all of your team, whether it be your planner, your designer, your builder, your partner or your wife or your husband. Everyone down the line tends to cop a lot of your stress and your anxiety and your worry, purely because simple steps weren't followed. And, for me, that's a big key. And I see this as someone who's worked on well over 3,000 projects in my career and counting. Like, that's one of the biggest things I see, where I see projects go wrong, is where people don't take the time to get clarity around what they're looking to achieve and what they're looking to execute. So terraces are an exciting new revolution that I think are going to be a really popular little project under this new reform on sites. Often I find the best sites to do terraces can be corner lots. The beauty of corner lots on any street, you'll often have a corner on each end of the street and across the road from each of those ends. So on one stretch of street, you're essentially dealing with 4 corner lots, and then there's a block behind each one. So obviously corner lots are a lot harder to get than obviously your standard internal lot. But the good thing is there are corner lots everywhere, and often corner lots get overlooked because you often look at a corner lot and you might only see that you can do 2 on it. I find the people that do the best out of terraces, where they buy a corner lot or they acquire a corner lot, where the rest of the market only looked at it through the lens of either keeping the house or just doing a dual occupancy on the site. So often we've had clients do really well where they've been able to acquire a corner lot to do 3 to 4 terraces. Ideally, even if you can do it CDC, that's a bonus. But even under this new code, that CDC sometimes won't be possible due to various things, and one of them will be site width. Under CDC, you're required to have a 21 metre width at the building line. So even though this new SEP change is 18 metres, if you want to go down the CDC pathway, you're still going to be required to have a 21 metre minimum width at the building line to do a CDC. Whether that changes, we're yet to know. There was talk of some potential changes coming on July 1 to the low-rise diversity housing code, but again, no set confirmation, so don't take it as gospel until we know. And again, like I promised in a recent episode, that when or if some changes do come as a result of the low-rise diversity housing code for CDC, I'll definitely do an episode or two breaking that down of what that involves and what that means. But at the moment, when you're looking at a site to do terraces for a CDC, it's important to follow the low-rise diversity housing code, not this low to mid-rise reform. But the one thing I will say is that this low to mid-rise reform now opens up sites to do terraces CDC that in areas where you were not necessarily able to do so in the past. For example, let's use Northern Beaches, for example. If you have a corner lot, let's just say you found a really nice corner lot, and it fits within the low to mid-rise, new low to mid-rise reformed area. If it meets the requirements of the low-rise diversity housing code, there is possibility now that you can do a terraces CDC. A lot of people have been asking me, like they're showing me blocks on a 13 metre frontage width or a 12 metre frontage width, and they want to do a duplex, and they thought they could do it CDC. And I even had one person that they'd already acquired the site without getting advice. And unfortunately, under the low-rise diversity housing code, so the code for CDC duplexes, you're required to have a 15 metre width at the building line. So the only option for that site, and thankfully for them they did have a backup, is that one there has to be a DA because the width of the site is too narrow. So if you've got a corner lot, there still is possibilities to do CDC, but you need to make sure it meets the requirements of the low-rise diversity housing code. But the good thing is, in areas, let's use Northern Beaches, for example, if you've got a 500 square metre site, again, 500 doesn't necessarily mean that it works. So don't just base it on 500 square metres. There's still constraints and requirements that you need to meet. So, but the beauty is now there is openings now to be able to do the fast track CDC as well under terraces, and a lot of people don't understand that yet. So there are opportunities there to be able to go down that pathway. And obviously, I always say the early adopters going down the DA pathway is you're going to run against some councils, and this isn't to put a downer on it, but again, I'm very big on unmasking complexities for people, because I think a lot of people go in with their eyes blind and they go in too naive to where things sit. And the reality is the state has determined that we have a housing shortage, we have an undersupply of stock of housing, therefore we need to open some of that up. Now, it's exciting because it's opening up new opportunities, but some areas that it requires a development application. And let's not be naive to the fact that not every council in New South Wales, not every council in Sydney, not every council in those well-located areas are pleased or excited or over the moon about this reform. We have a lot of councils that either don't have the infrastructure, they may not have the personnel, they may not have the system to be able to handle new growth, a new volume of applications. And then we have some councils that flat out are very strongly against development, but also be aware that there's also people within those neighbourhoods who've lived on large half-acre blocks or even bigger for a long time in well-established areas in expensive, in some cases very expensive and affluent areas, where all of a sudden there is a fear of their neighbourhood becoming overrun with density, higher density, with larger volumes of housing, with potential traffic concerns or overshadowing concerns or privacy concerns, or just the reality of quieter neighbourhoods, possibly the fear of being overrun. And so you're going to deal with that. So don't be naive to the fact that if you have to go down the DA pathway, early adopters will come up against some resistance in some councils when you go DA. That's why I'm very big on making sure you get good due diligence, that you thoroughly are on top of your site, that you're not just acquiring a site because it meets the minimum requirements of frontage width, of lot size, of all of that. There's so many other things you have to factor in. Will it overshadow your neighbours? Will there be privacy concerns? Will you get solar access? Because the reality is you need to put an airtight application when it comes to your design, to your architectural. You need to make sure that you put an airtight application in front of council, especially if it's a council that is going to be looking for reasons to reject a DA or reasons to push back, and your neighbours and people within that neighbourhood who are not happy about that are going to be looking for reasons and looking for opportunities to see and to spot non-compliances to make that application very difficult. So I say to people that, look, make sure you do your homework. And that's why I say, just because the state government said there's 170,000 new sites that have opened up, yes, to a degree that is correct, but a lot of those sites don't work due to things like solar access, due to privacy, due to overshadowing, due to a whole bunch of constraints. Some of those sites that are big enough to do multi-dwelling, and I looked at one recently. In the Epping area. It's within the well-located area. It's big enough to do townhouses, multi-dwelling under this new set, but it was orientated wrong. There was large native trees on the site. There was a bunch of things stacking up against it. That when I looked at it, for me, the only alternative, the only real option was a dual lock's probably your best form of development on that site. So even though it met the requirements in terms of the state requirements, it still had a whole bunch of things that didn't stand up. So for me, terraces, there is great opportunity for terraces. As I said, corner lots are perfect. Amalgamating two lots side by side can be an exciting opportunity. Finding sites, I always say for terraces, it works better when you've got a lot more width than depth, because the problem is when you've got too much depth. Let's just say there's a site that's 20 metres or 21 metres wide, but it could be 50 metres deep or 60 metres deep. You might only get 3 terraces on that site. But if you run the yield then as townhouses, front to back, you might get a whole lot more. Let's say it's 60 metres deep. You might get, 4 or 5. So 3 versus 5, like you need to run the numbers then to see what stacks up better. So sometimes I find the sites that are very deep often are better set up for multi-dwelling townhouse developments rather than terraces. And that's why corner blocks are great, because you can obviously determine which side you can get your frontage with. Can you get under DA, you can go 18. CDC, you need 21 metres. If you can get the 21 and then you can fit a series of townhouses. We've often done 3s and 4s on corner blocks, or we've had clients get a corner block and amalgamate a site right next door, and sometimes you can get 5 to 6. We've done some really good ones where we've been able to get 6 on 2 corner blocks, where you may have only got a dual lock on each one. All of a sudden you can get 6. You're getting an extra yield of 2 more on that site. So that's going to be an exciting opportunity. Look out for the corner lots. Obviously, like any site, you've got to be looking for drainage. Does it drain in terms of stormwater? Native trees is a big one. But another massive one that people forget about with terraces, especially on the corner lots, is making sure that you can get your driveways to work. A lot of people acquire these sites and buy these sites without looking at can they get the driveways? It's all well and good to get 3 terraces, but can you get 2 driveway crossovers? Do you have enough room? Like, can you get the driveway for the first terrace within 6 metres of a tangent arc under the Australian standards? And most councils will stand on this. Some will let you get a variation, but it's still risky. Often you're not allowed to put a driveway within 6 metres of the tangent arc of the corner. So where the curb is, you've got to have that 6 metre distance for your driveway. Obviously for coming out of the driveway and not impeding traffic that's turning, visibility, all that side of things. So there's a lot of things that people don't factor in. And that's for me, like when someone wants to try and sneak something through by getting a variation of a driveway closer, like I always say, like if you're buying the site, see if you can get a exclusive period where you can hold it, so you can apply to council for a Section 138 to see if you can get a driveway there. If you can't, well, you've just avoided a huge headache. If you can, well, great, that ticks the box, and you've got confidence then in your acquisition. Just little things like that are very key. So for me, terraces are an exciting avenue. They're an exciting opportunity. There is opportunity to be able to do DA and CDC. As I said, CDC won't work on every site, but if you do go down the DA pathway, just be very careful because there's still a lot of council controls you need to meet. So try and look for sites that, for example, sites where the living areas at the back, for example, are facing north is ideal, or if views and that sort of thing are advantageous, you can put your living areas on the first floor, so reverse living if the front's facing north, you can potentially do some forward facing private open spaces. There is those sort of opportunities, but it's important just to do your due diligence. Don't just base it off the minimum lot size. You still need to make the yields work. That's why for me, you can't go wrong with investing in some things like feasibility sketches so that you've got confidence of knowing if it can work, if it can fit. But the exciting thing is terraces are one great way of increasing density on the site, and it's not going away. Terraces have been around for a couple of years now under the Low-Rise Diversity Housing Code, but it's just opened up in a whole bunch of new areas. So a lot of people don't realise you can now do it CDC if it fits within that well-located area. It meets all of that criteria. And if you haven't watched a previous episode, go back to the episode where we break down this new low to mid-rise housing code, and that'll help educate you on what to look for and the type of sites that are available. Once again, as I said, within our show notes, we'll have that link to the spatial mapping system so you can see if the site you own or are looking to acquire fits within that well-located area, or if you are on the hunt for a really good development site, this is a terrific way to do a project. And the good thing about terraces as well, and I'll wrap up with this, is that often you can do a Torrens title, for the terraces. Often you'll find a lot of multi-dwelling projects, townhouses more often than not, tend to be a strata title. But the good thing about Torrens the terraces, that you can often do a Torrens title subdivision, which can be very attractive to buyers. I find especially the older generation, they really love the Torrens title, because when they think of strata title, although this is a myth and it needs to be broken, and I think a lot of new buyers understand it, when a lot of older generation or downsizers think of a strata title, they think of the old school block of units where there might be 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top, and that they think of that as the strata title, not knowing that often even a lot of duplexes these days do have a strata title. But incredible opportunities opening up for terraces. So if that is an investment strategy you want to go down, I strongly encourage it. I recently finished a terrace development myself, and I just think they're a terrific way. And if you can do it CDC, it's an added bonus, because obviously you've got a fast track approval system. You've got more certainty around timeframes and approval times. Obviously, council times can blow out, and you've got obviously CDC. You've got no objections, and the delays that come as a result of objections and that side of thing. And it's just generally a much smoother pathway, especially if you are new to the industry and you don't have the ability to hold things long term. Some council DAs can blow out anywhere from even 12 months or more. And under this new reform, you need to understand, as I said, some councils will not be over the moon about it. So as a result, we're going to see some of them push back. So I tell people, make sure you put lots of contingency of time on these projects going forward. So look, I hope you've enjoyed that episode. There's so much to unpack, and I'm sure we'll jump on and do another episode once we get a bit more clarity around the low-rise diversity housing code. We'll break that down. But the exciting thing is you can do CDC. If you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch. And look, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it around. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you're first to know whenever a new episode comes out every Wednesday. So look, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week.